This morning's passage from 2 Corinthians follows several verses from the Apostle Paul, where the Apostle Paul speaks to the church in Corinth of the importance of reconciliation, that is, the bringing back together of severed or injured relationships. Paul emphasizes the importance of our being open with one another and with God, despite the many challenges that we might encounter. Listen to God's word for us as it is found in 2 Corinthians 6, verses 1 through 13. As we work together with him, we entreat you also not to accept the grace of God in vain. For he says, "At an acceptable time I have listened to you, and on a day of salvation I have helped you. Look, now is the acceptable time. Look, now is the day of salvation. We are putting no obstacle in anyone's way, so that no fault may be found with our ministry. But as servants of God, we have commended ourselves in every way, in great endurance, afflictions, hardships, calamities, beatings, imprisonments, riots, labors, sleepless nights, hunger, in purity, knowledge, patience, kindness, holiness of spirit, genuine love, truthful speech, and the power of God, with the weapons of righteousness for the right hand or the left, in honor and dishonor, in ill repute and good repute. We are treated as impostors, yet we are true, as unknown and yet are well known, as dying and look, we are alive, as punished and yet not killed, as sorrowful yet always rejoicing, as poor yet making many rich, as having nothing yet possessing everything. We have spoken frankly to you, Corinthians. Our heart is wide open to you. There is no restriction in our affections, but only in yours. In return, I speak as to children. Open wide your hearts also. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
I join Deborah in extending a welcome to you this morning, and I want to say a special thanks to the worship committee for not scheduling our outdoor worship service for today. I think we timed it just about right this year. I want to echo an announcement that Deborah made about our Habitat build coming up. We do still need sign-ups for that this coming Saturday, and if you're willing to make some sandwiches or put some snacks together for that work team, the Sign-Up Genius is waiting for you to visit it, so hope you'll do that. This last year, I had a scary experience, not directly but indirectly, because of a dear friend's heart condition. Someone my age had open heart surgery. What a wake-up call. He's a healthy guy, always has been, but his doctors discovered that he had a small heart defect and it was impacting something called his ejection fraction. I'm sure some of you know all about that. This has to do with the volume of blood that the left ventricle of the heart is able to pump. It's usually somewhere between 55 and 70% for a normal person, but my friend was at 19%, which is considered heart failure. He had been very low on energy for a long period of time. He didn't know whether something was going on psychologically or whether it was something wrong with his diet or something else. It bothered him for a long time. Was he depressed? It was frustrating until finally he realized that there were some blockages in his heart that had not been recognized due to a genetic disorder. It was frustrating, but he visited the doctors and finally was scheduled for a triple bypass surgery. They cut his sternum, they opened his chest, and worked on him for hours. It's humbling to think about what he went through, but it changed his life. It really did. It was a long recovery, as you might imagine, but today he's doing just fine. Our text this morning invites us to consider, I think, a kind of spiritual open heart surgery. The Apostle Paul seemed to be diagnosing his former congregation with some kind of spiritual blockage. And he would know. He had a close and deep connection with the church in Corinth. He had spent about 18 months there on his first visit, according to Acts 18. He'd stayed in touch with them over the years. 1st and 2nd Corinthians, the two New Testament letters that are in our Bible, are likely a combination of several different communications, letters that Paul had written over the course of 5 or 6 years probably. And in those letters, he often addressed concerns that had come up within the community, perhaps personal conflicts or bigger problems, issues that had to be dealt with, and teachings sometimes that Paul believed were not authentic to the truth of the gospel message that he had first preached to them. Paul had a pastor's heart, and he wanted the community in Corinth to thrive. They were part of his family. You know, I've never started a church, never been a part of a new church development, but I hear it's kind of like giving birth to a child, kind of like having a child that you're raising, and that protective parental concern for the well-being of a community or a child comes out in our passage this morning. Paul reminds the Corinthians of all that he and his colleagues had endured in order to provide for the community, that long litany of things that he mentions, that things that they went through in order to provide for the Corinthian community. He talked previously, as you may remember in 1 Corinthians, about the gift of love that he hoped they would employ in all of their interactions with one another. You may remember him talking about all of the gifts that they might be given, but that none of them make any difference without that gift of love. Love is patient, love is kind, it's not arrogant or envious or boastful or rude. Remember those words? Paul called them to let go of all that might hinder the movement of God's love between them and God and between one another in the community. Despite the ongoing gift of God's grace being poured out of God to God's people, Paul seemed to suggest that there were things going on that could still get in the way of their being able to fully realize and appreciate the gift of grace in their lives. It's like there was something blocking that flow of love and grace. Years ago, I was introduced to a small little booklet written by Robert Boyd Munger called My Heart, Christ's Home. Munger envisioned the heart as a home with many different rooms and suggested that Jesus Christ wanted to be welcome in every single room of the house. In other words, in every part of a person's life, in every aspect of their heart. You know as well as I do that there are parts of ourselves that we sometimes are reluctant to give over to God. There are rooms that we want to have more control over. There are things we don't want to confess. Sometimes we even try to keep secrets from God, and in so doing, we only hurt ourselves or others. Munger envisions this as that one closet in the house that you just don't want to clean out. That closet that gets stuffed full of something that eventually becomes a huge weight and may even start to smell after a while. We try to hide what's in there, and over time it can begin to affect the health of the house. Munger's story imagines Jesus gently and in love opening the closet door and helping us to clean out the closet. Munger envisions God opening the door of our hearts to help make it healthy, to remove the blockages so that love can flow freely between us and God. Capital One asks, what's in your wallet? Maybe Paul is asking, what's in your closet? There are so many things that could be there. A broken relationship, something we did that we're ashamed of, a hurt that's left us damaged, bruised, and suffering, a sin that we can't let go of, an addiction that leaves us crippled, and unfulfilled, an experience that's left us skeptical and untrusting. Or maybe even our own selfishness and pride, our impatience with one another or with God, or the constant distractions on our time that keep us from spending our time in the healthiest of ways. Maybe it's that constant attention to the cell phone or social media or the latest craze or fad. Maybe it's our own discouragement and apathy leaving us feeling empty and without passion. When left unchecked, any of these things can hinder the movement of God in us and among us. These are the things that keep our hearts closed off to the gift of God's grace and love. And Paul, more than anything, wants the Corinthians to experience the joy and wonder of having lives reconciled to God and to each other. Paul wants the Corinthians to trust him and his leadership among them. He wants them to realize that everything he said is for their good. He writes about Jesus being the means by which the gift of God's grace is given to them, not only to reconcile and reconnect with God, but to be the means by which the body of Christ, the faith community that we call the church, can fully function and work as it fulfills God's purpose in the world. This grace, which is embodied in Jesus Christ, enables us to listen to, respect, care for, serve, and love each other, no matter how different we may seem or appear to one another in the larger church. So Paul invites us to open our hearts to God, to be reconciled to God, and to recognize that today is the day for that. The day of salvation, Paul says. In other words, today is the best day to really live, to be present to the wonder of our Creator and God's redeeming love for us in Jesus Christ. This is the moment to open the gift of God's grace, the gift that never runs dry, the gift that never goes away. We can't live by dwelling on the past, and we can't count on tomorrow even though we might want to prepare for it. Life is here and now. Grace is here and now. We are here and now. You, me, God, in all of God's wonder and splendor and love. Summertime used to be a wonderful time for me to go and visit my grandparents when I was a kid. I have great memories of sitting with them. As a 10-year-old boy, I was wanting to run around and do all kinds of things, but they kept finding reasons for me to sit with them. They taught me so much about learning to enjoy the moments of each day, not rushing things, not getting beyond myself so far that I forget the gift of presence with them. My grandparents have long since passed on, and I cherish those memories. For many summers, I'd spend a week or two visiting them, visiting my mama. We would enjoy the summer playing Scrabble or making cookies together or working on a latch hook pillow. Remember those? We would talk and listen and share with each other, and I'd take in the wisdom that she had to offer. Maybe it didn't make much sense to me then, but today it does. Visiting my Mims and Papa Boo on the farm, we would visit their garden and pick vegetables, and then we'd sit on the back porch and snap beans and shuck corn. Or maybe I'd help pick up pecans out of the yard. That was a lot more fun than picking rocks up out of the field. We'd share time together, opening our hearts to each other and just listening, being together. Those are great summertime memories, and I bet you have your own. Summer offers us gifts like that sometimes, to slow down, to be still, to enjoy time away with one another. It's time like that that allows us to appreciate the gift of now, the gift of grace. Helps us let go of the things that can sometimes block those paths between us that keep love from flowing freely. There are some wonderful people among us who've been trained to help us learn how to get a little bit more unblocked, if you will. They're called Stephen ministers. We're going to commission some of them later in the service. A Stephen minister journeys with us for a little while when asked, for as long as we need. They help us to slow down just a little bit and listen to our stories and help us to open our hearts to the grace that's present for us here and now. They might help us discover the things that are blocking us from experiencing that grace, or they might simply help us to find our way out of a dark or difficult place. Stephen Ministry is named for Stephen, one of the disciples who was chosen to care for the community of faith in the early church. It's recorded in Acts 6. The disciple Stephen, just another chapter later, is stoned to death because of his vibrant faith. That stoning took place under the authority of none other than the Apostle Paul, who at that time was named Saul and was a vigilant opposer of those who followed Jesus. But Paul had his own experience of grace shortly afterwards because the community was miraculously open to him in showing love and grace to this one who had been so ruthless. He went on to spread the good news of God's love in Jesus Christ throughout the Gentile world, taking that message of grace to Thessalonica and Corinth and Philippi and Ephesus and Rome and to so many other places. An open heart led to the sharing of good news and then to an experience of grace and then to transformed lives. It's amazing. On the other side of surgery, my friend tells me that in the rearview mirror, the experience is somewhat surreal, but that it seemed to be effective. But the most important gains for him, beyond improved heart function, were the reconnection with friends and family. It changed his perspective to have his heart opened, to have a new opportunity to live and to pay attention to what's most important. He literally said that it was a reminder that the best time of all is now. What a great lesson. This is the moment that we have to recognize, accept, and enjoy God's grace and love in our midst. This is the day of salvation. The best time of all is now, and we're meant to enjoy it together. So let's not waste another day or to take for granted God's gift of grace to us, but rather open our hearts to the gift that is before us and to the effect that it can have in all of our relationships. May it be so. To God be the glory.